Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all ready to learn. Let me just change something real quick. It looks like my background music isn't capturing properly. There we go. I hope you're all ready to learn today. It's going to be a pretty big lesson. I went back to all my previous lessons and I took a look at all the stuff that we've talked through, and there's quite a bit. Obviously, I can't cover everything because otherwise we'd be here for like 3, 4, 5 hours, but I wanted to pick and choose from some of the most important topics that we covered over these past few weeks. It's going to be... Are you ready to absorb both? So maybe not. We'll try our best. I wanted to just take the topics that I thought were going to be most important for carrying on with the future lessons. There's a couple of small things, like a couple of colloquialisms. You can't wait for your brain to fail you. Well, as long as you take notes, at the very least, you'll have something to refer to when you're done, when we're done here. And then maybe once your brain turns back on, notes. Yeah, I mean, some people will take notes, you know. I was never really good at taking notes in school either, though. So I guess I shouldn't have too high expectations on the, in that case, myself. But some people learn better with that. Yeah, notes are hard. You know, I have some students who are really good at note-taking, and I'll look at their notebooks, and it's like color-coded and highlighted, and they have everything like completely down and organized in a way that's like super coherent. Recorded notes in the form of a VOD. That's what we have. But especially, I know that I have all my VODs archived on YouTube, and I will be referring to certain VODs as we go through these lessons because I want this to sort of be like the main review VOD for the past lessons that we've done. And I think that if I point out like where certain lessons had their reviews from, if there's a certain topic that confuses someone, they can go back to my VOD archive and yeah, you can see them. You can see the recorded lessons on YouTube. So like say you get stuck on te form or you get stuck on past tense, then if I tell you what lesson it's from, you can go back to that and see maybe if the explanations there are a little bit more clear, since obviously I'll have more time to do so in a dedicated lesson. Good evening, Kono Wibda. I hope you're ready to learn. We haven't started yet. I'm just talking about just notes and in general how we've gone through quite a lot over these past few weeks. I think it might be a good idea to let people filter in before I start going guns blazing. Sensei, go kigenyo. Kino no pop quiz kurete arigatou gozaimasu. Oh, yeah, you're welcome for the pop quiz. It was also really funny to hear you say that. For those who don't know, I was in Reina's chat earlier and I made her say something somewhat embarrassing in her chat, but I typed it in all Japanese. And good evening, Siren. It's wonderful to see everyone here, gathering, ready to study, ready to learn. We're gonna be starting from the way beginning. And not a pop quiz for everyone here, but a pop quiz I gave to her in her own stream while she was live in a maid outfit. But way back, when I started in February, like the second week of February, these streams were actually the first stream where I had real, like, chat interaction. And way beginning, learning hello. Exactly, learning hello, learning how to read. Because that's the most important part, learning the alphabet. And when I first did this, it really helped give me the confidence to continue streaming. And like, the chat interaction wasn't a lot, but like, it meant a lot to me at the time because I was just starting. This was like the first time I had a chat that I think had over 4 or 5 viewers. So we're gonna get started from the beginning here. The way beginning. So, I learned how to say... Well, that's quite a sentence, Weeb. I just realized my chat box isn't showing up. Oh, I have it set to invisible for some reason. There we go. Let me transition that, and now we should be good. Let me just make sure properties... Oh, none of those messages were showing up. There we go now. Let's go. So the first thing, obviously, for those of you who are new to Japanese, for those of you who have watched a lot of anime but haven't looked into the written language, I learned everything to be a creepy guy before learning how to ask how someone is. That is some set of priorities. So let me show you this first. And I just realized I do not have my tablet plugged in, so I'm going to plug that in. So what these two tables are on the top left and on the bottom right, I'm going to write down the English translation for what it is, what we have here, if it would plug in. So let me just write this in. Ooh, looks like everything exploded. We have Hiragana and Katakana, very good. And let me just make sure my colors are right here. So here we have Katakana and Hiragana. And they're important for two different reasons. If the easiest way for me to explain the importance between Hiragana and Katakana is that, as we know, Japanese is a language that is all symbol-based in terms of its writing. They have traditional Japanese words that we know what they mean, and they have their own meanings and whatnot. So I think the simplest way to talk about this is to talk about names first. So say you have a Japanese name like, I don't know, let's say your name is Takeshi. So obviously, you'd write it out as the syllables there. You could see we have... Let me pull out my trusty pointer that was given to me by a wonderful artist named Nelavaki, I think it's pronounced. And... ta-da! So, ta-ke-shi. We can look at the katakana, or the hiragana chart here. We have ta, ke, shi. So everything in Japanese is based off of these syllables that we have here. So each syllable, each sound is appointed a character, and there are 46 different characters in hiragana. You own 5 katana swords, 7 body pillows, and I'm hoping to be fluent. Please don't say... You can own 5 katana swords and 7 body pillows, but dear God, do not tell me that you're going to be fluent on Rosetta Stone of all materials. You can use Duolingo, you can use free online websites, but not Rosetta Stone. Avoid that. And then if we look here, so the Japanese language is where these traditional Japanese words come from. Meanwhile, katakana is where we use non-Japanese names, foreign names, like English names, German names, Spanish names, any names that aren't native to Japan, any names that don't have Japanese origin. We use this table of syllables here. They're read the same way, like we have a, I, u, e, o. They're spoken the same way, they're pronounced the same way, but when you see it in writing, it lets you know immediately that this is a loan word. It's not a word native to Japan, it's something that they borrowed. So for the most part, when you're seeing Japanese written out, it's gonna be mostly in hiragana. Katakana is used to indicate that we're using loan words. Like, if we're using a name, we can use my name, for example. So, my name is Elliot, so... the... o... to. Echi. You're right. Because that echi is actually H. So, o... to. So, Elliot. Let me look in the chart here. For D. And then O. And then we have to. So di, o, to. And this little symbol here, this is something that we use in order to, what we say, extend a syllable. So if I were to romanize this, if I were to write this out in English, it would read as di, o, to. This little tsu here, you can see tsu is right over here, is what we use to sort of extend the sound of a syllable. And you don't need to focus too hard on this right now. I just want to go over briefly how these languages work, how the symbols sort of connect to each other. There's a lot of intricacies behind this that you can refer to the first lesson that I uploaded to YouTube to actually sort of get a bigger explanation. I talk more about like combined letters, like for example, the character Control Shift. Let me just undo it a little bit here. Can't do this with that hand. Let's see. Like the character, for example, using the hiragana characters here for ri and yu. When you use what looks like a lowercase version of the letter, honestly, the lowercase version of yu, it doesn't read as Ryu, but rather Ryu. The I sound is dropped, so it's not the U. Incorrect. If it was Ryu, it would be written as Ri, and then the bigger U. So those are just some little parts about hiragana and katakana, about the combined sounds that we have here. But for the most part, I'm going to romanize everything so that you can understand them based on how they sound rather than how they read. I'm going to write things out pretty much in Japanese, English, and in Romaji, which is the English version of these letters, just so that you can sort of see how it all translates and how it all appears. That's hiragana and katakana. Like, actually, yeah, like nya. You know, nya. Nya would be written as... Let me take out the pointer for now. Nya would be written as... You know, ni, and then ya. Nya. Small ya. Ni ya. Nya. So that is hiragana and katakana. Just a short little introduction. That was the first lesson that I talked about. And I talked about some other things, like across this chart, there's a lot of characters that do look very similar, both in hiragana and katakana. Note, for example, if we look at the character ki and the character... Also, there's something wrong in this chart, I just noticed. So, sa and ki are the same, almost the exact same look. It's just that one of them has an extra line through the middle of it. Sa has one stroke across its top side, while ki has two strokes. And actually, someone messed this up on the chart here. This symbol here for chi is actually, I don't know why this happened. I don't know like what I pulled this from for them to have reversed it. Chi looks more like this. Not exactly like that, but it's a lot closer than looking exactly like Sa. Sa and Chi are very similar in design as well, but Chi is sort of the reverse of Sa. So there's a lot of similar looking characters here, and honestly, it may seem daunting at first, but if you take the time to know which of the characters are similar to one another, you can use it to your advantage and sort of have a sort of mnemonic to remember which one is which. For example, let's look at ne, and then we look at re, and we take a look at, where is it, wa. You can see they all have that vertical line that goes straight down, and a little zigzag pattern, but ne has a loop at the end, re has a squiggle at the end, and wa curves into itself. There's these little differences here that make it really easy to mess up. Hiragana chart's making sure that I don't go through something backwards. Yeah, you're right. I was going through all my slides and seeing some of the things that I wrote backwards was just silly. Also, if you take a look, even in the same character, in the same consonant sound, ra, ri, ru, re, ro, ru and ro both have that same structure, but ru has that loop at the end while ro doesn't, which is interesting because that loop at the end kind of looks like an O, while the one that has the actual O sound doesn't have that loop. That's usually what I used to remember when I'm like reading something really fast and I like have to make sure. Ro does not have the loop. Ru does have the loop. And you're right, Siren. Katakana has a lot of trickier ones because I think it's the way the characters are written that makes them look tricky. If we take a look at Tsu and Shi, they both have that long curved line, but then Tsu has two lines that sort of look like they're going downwards, while Shi has two lines that look like they're more going to the side. I have my own mnemonic for this. Usually when I draw it out, when I think about it, the katakana for Shi looks like this. So they're more parallel, it looks closer to an equal sign. But if I draw the hiragana version of Shi, I know that my line crosses through those like that. So this I know is Shi, because that's how Shi is drawn in hiragana. While Tsu has two lines that go like this. And I know that if my line cuts through them again, like this looks like the hiragana version of Tsu. That's my mnemonic, or that's like my visual for recognizing the difference between Shi and Tsu. We also have things like Ku and Ta, where Ta is the same character as Ku, but with a line through the middle. There's a lot of these little similarities here that you have to make sure you catch yourself on, otherwise you're going to misread things pretty poorly, and you just want to make sure that you have these down. I think the main thing I want to say is that when you're getting into learning Japanese, Ka and power, yeah. Ka looks the same as the kanji for power, but when I first learned Japanese, when I was first studying, I spent probably a week or less, I think, just doing flashcards on hiragana and katakana, memorizing which ones were which. And once you have those down, the entry to everything else is a lot lower, because once you have hiragana and katakana down, the only other thing you have to worry about is what we call kanji. And everyone talks about it, everyone knows it. Kanji forms the words in the language. It's the pictograms, I guess you call them? Pictograms? Representing words. So for example, with kanji, we have these images here, and there's an image you have to remember for every single word. Every kanji is related to some word, and then those kanji can also be used together as compound words. For example, let's say we take the following word. This kanji is what we call gaku. Gaku is how it's pronounced. And what we do with this, what this means, this represents the idea of studying. Study, school, learning. So gaku represents studying, represents school. So then, looks like my thing unplugged itself and plugged itself back in. We have this here, this kanji now. This is read as... Why is this not working? Guess I'm using my mouse. This is read as... How's my mouse hand? Say... is this working again? Let me unplug and plug back in. I'd like to not do this with the mouse. Are we back? Ooh, say. It's gonna look like this. It's gonna look a little scuffed. This is say. And what this kanji represents, what this character represents here on the left here, this is what we call... There we go, we're back. Life. So, school life is one way you'd see this. Or, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. So this is gaku, this is sei. It's also read as has multiple readings. Kanji in general have multiple readings based on their context. Typically, there exists two main readings. We call it the... Actually, I'm not even going to refer to those words right now because I don't want to throw too much at you at once for just reading. As you guys may or may not know, historically, these kanji came from China. They borrowed the Chinese language, took these characters here, and the Chinese readings of these characters are what we typically use in compound words. And the Japanese reading is what we typically use for Japanese words. They made an old reading that they use for compound words. The new readings are used for the meaning of the individual character itself. So if we take these two kanji, study and life, we get the word gaku sei. This is gakusei. Gakusei, or student. So that is what this means. And I'm not going to go too deep into this right now. I'm going to be bringing kanji up as we go through this review because a lot of this review is from stuff that I've written down in the past. So I'll make sure to translate everything for you guys, make sure to tell you guys what kanji means what. But for the most part, just know that in Japanese, we're going to be using hiragana, katakana, and kanji all together in order to represent ideas and sentences. So, the first thing I want to talk about, I actually deleted the original slides from my second lesson, but we're going to talk about the things that we talked about in my second lesson. Very, very, very basic grammar. Very basic. We're starting off here. The first thing that we're going to talk about is what we call particles. So it's very, very, very important that we get to this point first, that we talk about what these are first. So in English, we have words that sort of connect ideas to another. The closest comparison that I can think of in Japanese to particles, we think about words like the, or, and, is, etc. So words like this, in Japanese, words that serve functions like this that they serve in English are particles. But the way particles are used are always used to connect two parts of speech to each other. Connects two parts of speech together. And we're going to start by explaining a very basic one that is probably familiar if you absorb a lot of Japanese media. You'll probably be familiar with this one. The first particle we're going to talk about is the character ha. While it is the character ha, it's pronounced wa when used as a particle. So when we connect two nouns using wa, this wa tells us specifically represents being. It's very similar to the English word to am, is, are, and so on. So if I use the sentence, for example, this reads as, I'm going to throw a kanji here, watashi wa. I'm going to use a lot of the same words a lot because, again, I don't want to throw too many new words here. I want things that I can say at once, and then you'll recognize it as I use it multiple times throughout this lesson. Watashi wa gakusei. So the literal translation of this character here, watashi wa gakusei desu. This is the Romanized version of the sentence. Very, very, very basic. Watashi wa gakusei desu. Watashi is I. The particle wa represents being. It represents that you are something. So I am. Gakusei, as we mentioned earlier, is a student. And desu, what desu is that it is technically a verb. And in Japanese, we need to end our sentences with a verb in order for it to sort of be grammatically correct. If I just say watashi wa gakusei, if you say that in casual conversation, you'll be understood. But like writing an essay, formally writing properly, the desu is there to sort of be a formal ending to your sentence. Watashi wa gakusei desu. I am a student. And for this beginning, we're going to end most of our sentences with this, because we're not going to be focusing on verbs until quite a while. That's wa. Now, another particle we'll use. This actually doesn't connect two parts of speech, but rather is used as an ender. And that next particle is ka. So this one doesn't have any funny pronunciation. Pronounced ka. So wa is used to represent being, that you are something. Watashi wa gakusei desu. Now, if I were to ask something like, let's say, anata, and I'm not going to write the kanji for this one. Anata wa gakusei? Gakusei desu ka? So here, anata wa gakusei desu ka? Let's write this out here just so that we can see it. Anata wa gakusei why is that happening? Why is it randomly turning into a hand? Desu ka? Oh, I see why. So, anata wa gakusei desu ka? What this means. So, anata is you. And then gakusei we know is student. The ka represents asking a question. So rather than in English we have the question mark to indicate that we're asking a question. We have the question mark and our tone. And we have words like who, what, where, when, and why. Or are you? Things like that. In Japanese, all we need to do in order to represent a question being asked is ka. Desu ka? So, are you a student? So the way this works, gakusei being student, anata is you, and desu ka, that desu ka is essentially the are, or wa desu ka. So by adding ka to the end of your sentence, you can turn it into a question. So for pretty much any Japanese sentence that you hear out, if you hear it end with a ka, it means that whatever was said to you was a question. Anata wa gakusei desu ka? Are you a student? There's one more particle we're going to talk about here. So we have wa, we have ka, and the last particle that we're going to talk about here is no. Pronounced no. No. So what this is, so usually we use this to connect two nouns similar to wa. So we have noun 1, no, noun 2. And the way this works, it usually indicates some type of possession. Possession of some sort. So for example, if I were to say Nihongo, which we know is Japanese, Nihongo no gakusei. If I said something like this, Nihongo no gakusei, we know that this means Japanese. We know this means student. So essentially what this means, one way we would read this is Japanese student or student of Japanese. The main idea here is that when I use no, noun 1, no, noun 2, noun 2 is sort of your main idea, what we're focusing on here. We're focusing on someone being a student here. While noun 1, the first noun, is sort of the restriction here. Or the condition. Good evening, Spuds. Konbanwa. So, restriction or condition, you know? So, we're a student. Gakusei. What kind of student? Japanese student. Could be Eigo no gakusei, could be Sugaku no gakusei. Whatever this first word here is, it tells us what we are a student of. And here's the sort of situation where it's important to know what the kind of particle you're using, how it relates. So let's see the following sentence. Let's say Eri otto wa gakusei. This. So this would mean Elliot is a student. But if I say something like Erioto no gakusei, if I use a different particle here, if the particle was not wa, but rather no, in this case here, Erioto no gakusei, this would be Elliot's student. So it's important to know what each particle you're using does to the sentence here. Erioto no gakusei is talking about a student, someone who is my student, but Erioto wa gakusei represents that I myself am a student. So it's important to know what particle does what, otherwise you end up mixing up what everything means. So here we have wa. Wa represents what you are, that you are something, while no represents possession or condition, that sort of constraint, something that is affecting what you are. Student of Elliot. Elliot is student. It's two different things. So make sure that you understand, that you write down or take notes on what each particle does. So let's take a look now. If we take a look, I actually have pretty much the rest here is actually just previous reused slides. I didn't actually save the slides from when I did this first lesson for some reason. So, the next thing that we're going to talk about, the next thing that I want to go over, and this is going to be a pretty, how do I say this? Pretty expedited part of a lesson here. Lesson 3, the third lesson that I talked about, was on this topic here. We have this table here, and you can see there's a lot of words that use a lot of the same characters here. We can see this is kore. Let me pull out my pointer again. This is kore. This is sore. This is are. This is dore. Then we have kono here. Sono, ano, dono, and then koko, soko, asoko, and doko. So what these are, what this chart is, the way we use these words here, like Seer said in the chat, they're objects in the distance and places. So if I have a word like kore, anything in this row here, kore, kono, koko, these all have to do with relativity based on what we're saying. If I say, let me add a layer here. If I use a sentence, let's say I say something along the lines of, kore wa, I'm going to throw a new word here. It uses one of the same kanji. Gakko. This. Let's say I write something like this. Kore wa gakko desu. What this means, kore means this. It means that it's an object right near you, that you're standing at the school, and that's a school. This is a school. However, looking back at that chart again, you can see we have kore, sore, are, and dore. So we're going to focus right now in this lesson on these top 3 rows, just as a quick rundown. Kore, sore, are. If instead of kore wa gakko desu, if I were to write something like sore wa gakko desu, like this, then we would have a slightly different sentence. Sore wa gakko desu. What this means here now is that is a school. So, kore means this. Nearby. Speaker. While sore represents that, or near person talk to. So kore, this, sore, that. And then lastly, we have are. What are means, are wa Gakko. Just gonna use the same sentence just for ease of reading. I don't have to throw too much different vocab at you guys. So, are wa gakko desu. Or that over there is a school. So, are represents that over there. Far from both parties. And so as to not go too long over the subject, we have kore, sore, are. We have kono, sono, ano. So the difference between kore and kono is that kore talks about something in general. Kore wa gakko desu. That is a school. While kono, you could say something like kono gakko, that school. This, you can see here, this noun, that noun, as opposed to just saying this one or that one. That's the difference here, but they're using the same idea that ko, kore, kono, koko, all represents closeness. Sore, sono, soko, all represent things that are distant from you, while are, ano, asoko, all represent things that are very far away from you, far from both people involved. And then dore, dono, and doko are used as question words, used to sort of ask where things are. Asoko combo breaker, you're right. It's the only word in this chart that adds an extra syllable. So for example, just as a brief usage of questions here, like we said, we always end questions with desu ka as opposed to des. So if I wanted to ask a question like do, let's say that I go with the following sentence here. Let's say I want to ask where the bathroom is. I would say something like to I. That's backwards, I'm pretty sure. Toire wa doko desu ka? Right, toire wa doko desu ka? So what this means, it is the most survival phrase. Toire wa doko desu ka? Like we said, doko, dore, and dono all have to do with asking about where a location is. Doko meaning where it is, or I guess doko means where, while dono and dore mean what is, or whose is. They're question versions of these terms. So, this translates to, where is the toilet? Or where's the restroom? This time he says, osusume wa? Yeah, any recommendations? Right. You know, you're lost in Japan, you don't know what you want. Osusume wa? And they give you the recommendations. But doko represents where, and the same with these previous phrases here. The koso wa do? Which one, which, where. And again, this is talked about a lot in my third lesson. I go in depth more, give a lot more sentence examples on all these topics. But as a quick rundown, talk about where things are, what things are, where they're located. These terms here, kore, sore, are, kono, sono, ano, and so on. We use these to sort of reference things relative to the speaker. And they're used usually like very short form. It's used to ask about things that are near you. So it's a very simple topic. And it's very pattern based. We know that ko is things that are near us, so is things that are far. things that are far from everyone. Re and no both talk about objects, while ko, like koko, soko, asoko, all talk about locations. Now moving on, we're going to talk about another particle here. So, we have the particle mo. So, what mo is, very similar to the English word also. So, Erioto wa VTuber desu. Elliot is a VTuber. Then, if you're talking about someone else, like if I'm talking about myself, I will just call myself Elliot. But if I'm talking about another person who was here before, who I'm talking to, we have this san here, you know. You play anything, you watch anything localized, they always throw those honorifics like san or chan or kun. The safest one to use is always san. You know, you refer to someone, Mora-san mo VTuber desu. Mora is also a VTuber. And mo is only used in agreement. So if you're listing off people who are the same thing as you, or do the same thing as you, it serves as a usage similar to also. Erioto wa VTuber desu. Mora-san mo VTuber desu. I am a VTuber, she's also a VTuber. But it can only be used in agreement. If I were to say that she was not a VTuber, I would have to say Mora-san wa VTuber janai desu. Because janai means not. And we're actually going to talk about that in the next slide. But this was just a brief little talk about particles. An extra particle here. Mo meaning also. But instead of ending a sentence with this, if we want to say that we are not something, like I just said earlier, to negate a statement, we use janai desu, which I will write out. We read this as janai desu. For example, Erioto wa gakusei janai desu. Elliot is not a student. By adding in this janai, this means not. It means that we aren't something. And here you can see that this was when I explained what the word gakusei meant. So that meant, like I said earlier, gaku is learn and study, sei is life, school life, or student. So, these were all related to Lesson 3. Manhera Janai Janaimon. Yeah, I don't think I am either. And these two comments here, Janai and Mo, came with a lot of other miscellaneous grammar things. I thought these were more important to talk about. Janai and Mo. I think they're pretty important particles and just sentence modifiers to know, you know? It's important to know how to say a sentence, but it's also important to know how to say the opposite, how to negate something. Because if you can only speak in affirmations, well, it's going to be really confusing to say certain things. So, janai is not. So, janai desu. Erioto wa gakusei janai desu. I am not a student. And from here, a lot of these are just very basic vocabulary words, a lot of just how things interact with one another. And they're all, so far, everything that we've talked about has ended, every example that we've gone through so far has ended with des or desu ka. Like, for example, with the kosawado, all these sentences ended with des. But when we got to Lesson 5 is when we introduced verbs. And a big thing about Japanese is that, for the most part, pretty much every sentence in Japanese is supposed to end with a verb. Like, formally, at the very least. At least from what I've studied. We always end with a verb. So what we're going to do, we take a look at our verb form base here. You could see the first time I went over verbs, we talked about their base form, what we call their dictionary form, and how to say them in both the present, positive, and negative. just, if we thought about like an English word, think about like the verb run. We don't have a dictionary form, but we would say is running or is not running in order to specify the positive or negative. But in Japanese, it's different. We have to modify pretty much the entire word itself to represent positive and negative. And to do that, there's two different kinds of verbs here. I'm not going to go too in-depth on it because, again, this is by a very case-by-case basis. So I'm just going to explain what the two types are. So here, you can see at the top it says verbs, or consonant stems. And I'm going to read out what these are. So hana, to speak. You can see I have the character here. Hanasu, I have ik, and iku as two separate verbs. These are both what we call consonant stem verbs, or verbs. You can see all these verbs are ending in an u sound, but hanasu and iku, right? But when we write them in our what we call present positive and present negative forms, the su and the ku both get dropped. The sound still stays there, hanas, ik, but rather than have iku masu, the ku sound changes to a ki sound, the su sound changes to a shi sound. And this is consistent. For any verb that is called a consonant stem, we simply change an u sound to an e sound. Hanasu turns to hanashi, iku becomes iki, ikimasu. So that's what we call the verbs. So if we're saying something is positive, saying that I talked, hanashimasu, hanashimasu. So I could say a sentence, very simple sentence, like, if I wanted to say a sentence, and I'm going to just go a little bit ahead and write out a sentence using ikimasu. Right, mas is positive, masen is negative. Very good. So if I want to say like, because we're going to use the same locations that we've been using, let's say school, so gakko. Gakko. School. Ni ikimasu. If I say something like this, gakko ni ikimasu, let me write this out here. We know gakko is school. Ikimasu. Gakko ni ikimasu. Ni is a particle that we're going to get to in a bit, but it's a particle that represents movement to a location. I am going to school. However, if I said gakko ni ikimasen, then we are negating that. We're saying that we are not going to school. So that's how this works here. Dictionary form is kind of weird because what it is essentially is sort of, when you look these words up in a dictionary, this is sort of like the root word before any conjugation, any modifications to the verb. But there's a lot of different ways we conjugate verbs. The dictionary form is there to have a sort of standard to base everything else off of. When we turn this word into a present positive, it turns into hanashimasu or hanashimasen. Iku becomes ikimasu or ikimasen. Gakko ni ikimasu, going to school. Gakko ni ikimasen, not going to school. And that is how we conjugate. And this is consistent pretty much for every verb. Masu, ending in masu, is a positive. Ending in masen is a negative. So this is what we call the verbs. The other type of verbs we have here are a little bit simpler. We call them verbs. And rather than changing the complete sound here, hanasu becomes hanashi, iku becomes iki, what we're actually going to get, if I look at verbs, So tabe and oki are the two ones that I used. Tabe is to eat, oki is to wake up. Taberu, okiru. When we call these ru verbs, or vowel stem, or ichidan, a ru verb, simply you just add that to the end of the word. Tabe is to eat, taberu, or tabe is eating, taberu means to eat. Oki represents waking up, okiru means to wake up. And then you can see here, the ru just gets dropped when we're talking about doing something in the present form. Taberu becomes tabemasu, tabemasen. Okiru becomes okimasu and okimasen. So it's consistent here as well. The ru sound gets dropped, the u sound gets dropped. Rather than shifting any other sound, we just keep what our verb initially started with. And this all I go over in my 5th lesson. So, taberu, okiru. These are ru verbs. The ru just gets dropped. In the dictionary, the base form, it is a lot, I know. And that's why I want to that's why I'm sort of inserting these like notes to where each lesson takes place so that you can skip around to that lesson and see like if there's something really confusing you. Well, first let me know, and second, you can go back to that video in the archive and see exactly more in depth what I talk about. Thank you for the sip. And the last thing, so there's ru verbs and u verbs, and like I'm saying, I would not recommend you remember the rule for ru and u. I'm going over that just to let you know that these are the two main ways verbs conjugate. But when you practice kanji, when you start learning like vocab on your own, you usually just learn the conjugation based on when you see those vocabulary words used in their context. Honestly, I don't really hard commit these to my memory either. I just practice reading, I just practice my vocab, and I just know how the conjugations work. The rules are there just for consistency, but it's not something that I would commit to memory, just to know that it exists. What is important, though, are these special cases here. And that's suru, to do, and kuru, to come. Suru is important. Very, very, very important. You'll see this a lot. Suru is the base verb. But when you talk about doing something in the present tense, shimasu. And you can see I have some examples of words in the corner here from when I first went over this. Here, benkyou suru is to study, aisuru is to love. Because sometimes verbs and nouns can overlap. Study is both a noun and a verb. Love is also a noun and a verb. So, these cases here, when you have nouns that you can turn into an action, you always attach that suru to it. And that means if you're doing that action, if you are studying, you would say something like, our special case here, let's say the sentence I want to write is, watashi o, and again, this is another particle that I'll get to in a bit. Ben So ben is this, kyo is this. This is our kanji. Ben, kyo, present positive means that we conjugate this to shi, ma, su. Correct. What this means, watashi, like we said, watashi o ben, kyo, shimasu. or what this translates to, I will study. Watashi o benkyou shimasu. I will study because, or I am studying. Either or, actually. Watashi o benkyou shimasu. I am studying. I guess it's more accurate as the present positive. So we could just erase this, actually, just to be consistent. So if you don't add the watashi, that still works. Isn't it ga? Is it? I know that o connects verbs together. I don't think ga is used for noun to verb. I could be wrong. There could be a case where that is the case. But as far as I know, I thought ga was used to connect noun to noun. But I could be wrong. That could be something that I have to look into. And I'll definitely actually take a look at that because now I'm curious. So I am studying. So if you don't add the watashi, if you just... Not adding the watashi means that you also wouldn't be adding the o, because the o is a connector to watashi and benkyou shimasu. So if you just say benkyou shimasu, that basically just means studying. But Japanese is a very context-heavy language. If you drop the pronoun, that personal pronoun, that watashi, then it usually is implied that you're saying that you're studying. Or depending on the context of the conversation, it could mean that you're telling someone else that they probably should be studying. Or asking if they're studying, I should say. Because we have a special form for commanding or asking people to do things. So benkyou shimasu on its own represents the idea of currently studying. You are studying at this moment. Right, exactly. Like saying hope you get well without actually including the I to say that I hope you get well. Because it's implied that you're the one saying it, so it's obvious. So, that's verbs. The important thing to know about verbs is essentially that if you throw a verb into a sentence, you don't have to use des. That is like the most important thing that I want to mention there. Des is filler when your sentence doesn't have a verb normally. Watashi ga nihongo o... Oh, interesting. I thought because... Oh, because... Yeah, you can see in the chat above my head. Watashi ga nihongo o benkyou shimasu. So, that's interesting because in that case, nihongo o is sort of implied. So because it's implied, does that mean that we just use the ga and drop the nihongo o because we don't say it? That's interesting. I actually... Like, the dropping of... I would think that, like, ga nihongo would be what gets dropped as opposed to nihongo o. But if that's the way that works, that's pretty interesting. I'm sure there's probably going to be a lesson on that later in the textbook that talks about that. But I didn't know that that's how the dropping works. I would have figured that watashi ga, and then, okay. So it works with the implications as well. That if I say watashi ga, and don't say what I'm studying, that what I'm studying along with that particle will also get dropped. That's an interesting. We'll get there in the future, yeah. So now, I mentioned a couple of them, but the lesson following this, I actually think this might have also been the same lesson that I talked about verb conjugation and then these next four particles. So, I'm gonna go pretty quick on this. O, like what I used earlier, used with verbs when the noun is a direct object. So here, keiki o tabemasu. You can see I wrote it here, keiki o tabemasu. I eat cake. And this is where word order starts getting different a little bit. Because in English we say, I eat cake. But in Japanese, if we were to translate this literally, keiki o tabemasu, this would be cake eat. But the verb always comes at the end. That's going to be something we're going to talk about as well with word order. But basically, keiki o tabemasu, we're using that present tense here, tabemasu, keiki o tabemasu. Or anime o mimasu. O connects a noun to a verb. Lets us know that this noun is being verbed. That anime is being watched. anime o mimasu. So that is what the particle o is. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but it represents the usage of a verb connecting to a noun. De is used to describe where an event occurs. So in this case here, 学校でアニメを見ます. So school de anime. So school is where the event is occurring, where you're watching anime. So like the previous sentence, anime o mimasu means I watch anime. But adding the place before that event there, where you're doing the anime watching, that tells us where it's occurring. 学校でアニメを見ます. So de represents place. Then we have ni, which represents movement. 私は学校に行きます. I will go to school. So what is different here, and you'll see it for the next particle as well, ni is used for verbs that involve movement. Going to school is motion, as opposed to o, eating doesn't require motion. You're just usually seated when you're eating, but the act of eating itself doesn't require your body to be moving, unless you consider the bodily functions that you're doing to be moving. But it's not you going from place to place. And same with seeing, mimasu. You're not moving anywhere. You're not going from a place to a place. So o is used for verbs when you're stationary. Meanwhile, ni is used for movement. 私は学校に行きます. And it's also used for time as well. This is 7時に起きます. 7時 is 7 o'clock. Ni represents time or movement. Okimasu is waking up. So you'll see the particle ni used a lot because it represents both traveling to places and is used when we're talking about time-related concepts. Numbers are the hard part there, right? I have an entire list of numbers that I'm also going to probably go through at the end because it is going to be important to talk about how to understand the numbers as well. And there's so many different modifiers on numbers that I think once you at least can recognize the symbols, that should help with knowing what numbers we're working with. The last of these four particles is a. This is a character for he, but when we read it out as a particle, similar to how wa is read as ha, or ha is read as wa, or how wo is read as o, e is pronounced this way when it's used as a particle. Watashi wa gakko e ikimasu. I, watashi, wa gakko, to school, e ikimasu, go to. I will go to school is how we'd read this in English. A literal translation, which we wouldn't say it's that normally, would sound like I, school, go to. But obviously that doesn't make sense. That literal translation doesn't read properly, so watashi wa gakko e ikimasu. I will go to school is a proper translation there. So now, we've talked about all these words here, and it's important, because we have so many different particles, o for verbs, de for places, ni for traveling, there was a following lesson. This was lesson 6. He is a little poetic, like you expect something else to come off going. Yeah. So like I just said, word order is very important in English. In English, we talk in subject, verb, object, typically. A is... I read that so wrong. A is a little poetic. Like you expect something... Oh, yeah. That's right. A and ni both represent traveling, both going to places. But I guess that's an interesting way to put it. I didn't really understand like why one would use e over ni. But like we expect something to come of doing that of that action. That we say that when we expect something to happen rather than we're just doing the action with ni. That's a good way to put it. So here, word order. English, we say subject, verb, object. I eat the pizza. I'm the subject. Verb is eating. And then pizza is the object. In Japanese, we have subject, object, verb. Verb, like I said, is always the ending. And we always start with our subject. Boku wa pizza o tabemasu. Boku wa pizza o pizza tabemasu. Eat. I pizza eat. And obviously when we're translating from a subject-object-verb language to a subject-verb-object language, obviously we're going to have to adjust. Yeah, it seems like it's in passive voice. That's another way to put it. That's a very good way to put it. I have, like, in passive voice, I have pizza eaten. I don't think that would be the proper passive voice, but yeah, it's like the difference between passive voice and active voice. Where when we're talking in active voice, I eat the pizza, but passive voice would be, am I wrong? The pizza has been eaten by me. That's what it would be. Yeah, that's the word order that we would use. Where you put the verb before the object. You can say it in English that way. It's not an incorrect sentence. Yeah, right. But honestly, in a way, I think not understanding English, because the big deal here is being able to understand Japanese's word order. This here I have because English is my primary language, but what's important to know is that the main idea comes first. Who the sentence is about comes first. The sentence is about me, and then in Japanese, we talk about what we're involved with. Boku wa pizza o, and what the topic is doing to the object. Boku wa pizza o. What's happening to the pizza? What am I doing to the pizza? I'm eating the pizza. And depending on what language you speak, it may or may not help your understanding of Japanese. There are other languages that I know of that have the subject, object, verb order. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I think really, if you're coming from a language where your word order is different than subject, object, verb, it's just an adaptation that you have to make. And I went over this whole lesson. I spent an entire, I think like an hour and a half or so last time I went over this, on the sentence structure for Japanese. And the sentence structure in Japanese, TTPOV. So we have our subject, which is our topic, our object, and everything affecting that object, the time and place, we combine over here, and then verb. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because, again, I had an entire lesson where I talked about this. But the idea is that in Japanese, we always introduce our topic first. We say what's happening to the object that we're interacting with, and then we say our verb. For example, the sentence, I will study Japanese in the library on Monday. Topic, verb, and an object, place, time. If we think about it, this is subject, verb, and then these last three topics here, these last three parts of speech here, are all our object. Subject, verb, object, as in English. However, in Japanese, we know it's our topic first, then we list our time, place, object, and verb. So a literal translation of this Japanese sentence, I will go to the library, I will study Japanese in the library on Monday. A literal translation would read as, I, on Monday, in the library, Japanese, will study. And when we read that out in Japanese, konnichiwa, Yusha-kun. We are currently studying through Japanese. We're about halfway through right now. I'm talking about word order. So this Japanese sentence here reads as following. Watashi wa getsuyobi ni toshokan de Nihongo o benkyou shimasu. This is the word order in Japanese. We take the topic, then we talk about the time and place of the object we're working with, and say the verb. A good way to think about this, is that it frames everything that is like detailed first before getting to what's happening, as opposed to English. Oh, welcome Yusha to the classroom. Thank you for following. And I drew this diagram as well. So the way Japanese works, the word order, we always start with who or what is being discussed, when they're doing it, where they're doing it, and then what exactly is happening. If we compare this to an English sentence, the way we say in English is what we're doing, or who we're talking about, what they're doing it with, where they're doing it, and then when they're doing it. If you notice, English does the entire thing backwards from Japanese. Aside from the topic, verb, object, place, time. If you look here, verb, object, place, time. It's alright. Sometimes you just think you're following someone and then you realize you're not following. I always find that embarrassing when I look for someone that I know, and I've probably watched a couple of their streams already, and then it turns out that I wasn't following them, and I was like, oh man, I have to wait till after they're done streaming because I don't want to feel weird. Not that it's weird to do it, but sometimes I want to avoid them thinking that in the middle of the stream, what? Weren't you following me already? You've chatted my stream a bunch of times. And then I just never hit that button. And I just don't want it to happen during the middle of a stream. But anyways, going back to this. Topic, time, place, object, verb. Some people talk about this going from inside out. Or outside in, I should say. That once we set up our topic, we surround the framing before knowing what's happening. While English is inside out, we know what's happening at its core. Then we start building the scenery around the main action, rather than set up the action and then build in the main point. That's sort of the main idea behind word order. My lesson on word order, I spent I went over 6 or 7 or 8 sentences where I broke down this word order in a very, very rote manner, boom, 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 phrase, 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 phrase. But I don't want to spend that much time on it today. I wanted to go through this one explanation, and also that this changes. Like I said, O is used for verbs that don't involve motion, while ni is used for verbs that do involve motion. So I'm going to go over one other sentence, and that sentence is, Elliot went to school by car today. The word order here is topic, time. Place is replaced with means, because, if you think about it, place, a car is kind of like a place, a bus is kind of like a place, so it makes sense. And destination is usually what we're interacting with. So object is replaced with destination. As opposed to saying, I am, in the previous example, as opposed to saying that that Japanese is what I'm studying, the school is where I'm going. It's that direct interaction, what we're doing. Means replacing the place, because the means is the vehicle that you're in, essentially. Destination replacing the object that we're interacting with, because our destination is what we're interacting with. So again, English starts as often the action and builds around it. I went to school. How? By car. Today. Japanese builds the setting and then says what we did. Erioto wa kyou kuruma de. So kyou is today. Kuruma de, this is car. Erioto wa today, by car, gakko ni ikimashita. And this is past tense. Mashita is past tense. I think I have past tense listed after this. I think I messed up where it is. Right, so English, the action is the most important thing. So they save it for the end. It's the best for last. Everything else is sort of filler to set up what we're talking about. Erioto wa kyou kuruma de gakkou ni ikimashita. Like gossip, right? That's actually a pretty good example, you know? They say, when did the gossip happen? Where did the... Actually, let me do it with the... When you're gossiping, you're talking about this... You say, like, today, in the locker room, and you're saying, someone did something to something else. Japanese is structured like a joke. The punchline isn't in the end. That's a very good way to put it, too. That you don't know what's coming until you wait till the end of the sentence. That's an excellent way to put it. I like that. Alright. And then here I just had some examples, like, again, the word order is important, understanding where each of those terms get placed. That's like the basic word order. But we can have a sentence where we don't have topic, time, place, object, verb. So if I said, I do not watch TV at all, I'm not saying where I'm watching TV. I'm just saying that I don't watch TV. So the place part isn't involved there. Boku wa zenzen terebi o mimasen. I do not at all TV watch. So that is just an example. I could add a place. Like I could say Boku wa zenzen ie ni terebi o mimasen. If I ie de terebi o. If I wanted to say that I don't watch TV at home, I could plug that in there. But you don't need to force yourself to fit a sentence to that perfect word order. As long as everything else falls in line, if you drop your place or you drop your time, then your sentence still makes grammatical sense. You just don't need to always include all 5 parts. Alright. So next. So this is another short thing. So if I said the sentence, Asoko ni gakkou desu. That over there is a school. I'm stating, we talked about this earlier with the kosoado, probably like about an hour ago at this point, maybe like 45 minutes ago. Asoko ni gakkou desu. There is a school over there. Or that over there is a school. That we're saying that when I say asoko ni gakkou desu, I'm just stating that something there, that the building there is a school. But this term, Arimasu, represents existence. This would be the proper way to say that there is a school over there. I've seen it where Japanese is spoken in sentence fragments with just the particles. Mimasen? Terebi o? Yeah. So like sometimes in casual conversation, and that's actually, I think that's 2 lessons from now from what I looked at my textbook, that there's what we call short form Japanese, because obviously what we're writing right now is like formal Japanese. It's like, if you want to write out sentences and it make coherent sense, like someone reading it knows the context of everything, or is able to get the context of anything from reading it, we write it out like this. But if you're talking casual conversation, a lot of times like particles can get dropped, or you can finish up a phrase with a sentence. Or like, I know like, if I say like boku mo, like when we said mo is a particle to represent also, if I say like boku mo, but not finish that sentence out, that means like me too. Watashi mo. Like, it's sort of like how in English, like we have slang and how we drop a lot of sentences and words. Japanese is the same way. And I think, again, it's hard to get into those sort of like colloquialisms, those like phrases and that slang, if we don't at first learn the basics. So here, asoko ni gakkou ga arimasu. What arimasu is, and I don't want to go over this too much because I think it's a pretty like, a concept that I could dive into a lot, but the short and simple of it is, arimasu means that an inanimate object exists, that there is a school over there, as opposed to saying that that's a school. That's what asoko ni gakkou desu is. It's basically saying that's a school, as opposed to saying there is a school over there. It's like a really subtle difference, but it's really just saying that it is something that is there. And the other thing I want to mention is that we have arimasu to refer to inanimate objects. Yeah, this other here. So again, using the kosoado terms that we talked about earlier, if I say kore wa cafe desu, I would be saying this is a cafe. Just I point at an object, point at the building that I'm right next to, and say, yeah, this is a cafe. But if I say koko ni cafe ga arimasu, I would be saying there is a cafe here, stating that this cafe exists. So arimasu means that you're stating that something is present here, which is different from just saying that that's what it is. This sentence here, not using the arimasu, tells you that that's what it is, while arimasu, using arimasu in a sentence means that it's here, that this is what it is. It's like arimasu and imasu, basically, like the translation for them is to be. Like the actual like comparison to is, am, are. While I said that wa serves similar to is, the actual verb to be is arimasu, or for verbs, or for living creatures, it is imasu. So, asoko ni sensei ga imasu. So I would be saying, there's a teacher over there. So arimasu is when we refer to the existence of inanimate objects, and imasu is sentient objects. Animals, dogs, humans, anything that's living. I think plants as well. But I just want to talk about this because depending on what book you're using, this comes pretty early on, depending on what resource you're using. So I just wanted to go over this for a little bit, because it is important to be able to point out like the existence of something. So if you're stating that something is there, we use arimasu and imasu. And I actually skipped over this. I think I was supposed to go over this earlier. So right now, I talked about desu and janai desu. You know, watashi wa gakusei desu means that I am a student, or watashi wa gakusei janai desu means I am not a student. But we didn't talk about tenses yet, past tense. If I want to say that I was something, let's say, because I'm a teacher now, you know, if I wanted to say that in the past tense that I was a student, I could say watashi wa gakusei deshita. So, what this means, watashi... So the reason why I'm not using boku, a very simple reason. As I'm going through this as a review lesson, as a recap of everything, I don't want to spend a lot of time drawing really complicated kanji, so I'm just going with watashi for now, because it's a lot easier to write out. Wa gakusei deshita. So what the sentence means, watashi wa gakusei deshita, since deshita is the past positive, this sentence means I was a student. Yeah, boku is typically used by males, though it's not out of the ordinary, I don't think, for a male to use watashi or other ones like ore. I think it's more common for women to use watashi and atashi, but I don't think like you're not allowed to. It's like there's no rule for it or anything. And then here, for the past negative, we have janakatta desu. So if I wanted to say that I was never a student, I could say watashi wa gakusei janakatta desu. So, very simple table here. Desu is present, deshita is past positive, so that I was. So similarly, we could say like, this is like, you usually use this with am, was. And these aren't the direct translations, but usually in the context that they'd be used, janai desu is am not. And then janakatta desu, this is was not. So it's all about tenses. It's all about confirming or denying, and then at what point it happened, present or past. And that's for, this is all for this. Any sentence that you don't end with a regular verb, any sentence that you end with this, like say you're not using the o or ni particles, the des sentences end with these four. Present, past, positive, negative. And then with verbs, verbs is a different case. So present positive, we have mas and masen. We talked about that. And simply, if it happened in the past, it's mashita. And past negative is masen deshita. So if I say I ate a hamburger, I would say hanbaga o. I didn't actually finish this up. This should be tabemashita. Let me correct that. Let me get the right brush, actually. I don't have the right brush loaded up. I believe this should be in the sorted brushes. Where's my chalk brush so it looks like it fits in? It's not sorted. Is it in calligraphic brushes? I would like to find my chalk brush, please. I like to use a new brush set and I suddenly cannot find my old ones. Assorted brushes? I don't think it's here. Oh well. Let me just switch to one other brush set. Try media. Yes, here it is. This is correct. We will get hard charcoal edge. I think that's what I used. And what it is, I actually made a mistake here. This should be, there's missing one character here. Should be tabe. Wow, that is an awful brush. That's not the brush that I've been using. Let's see. Is it pastel rough texture? I think this might be it, actually. Tabe. Tabemashita. There we go. I ate a hamburger. Hanbaga o tabemashita represents that mashita means that you ate a hamburger, as opposed to tabemasu. So the masu gets replaced with mashita. And then masen, we just say masen still, but then add deshita, which is the past positive. So we're just adding essentially the word that gives us the past tense to a negative. So, Nihongo o benkyou shimasen deshita. I did not study Japanese. That masen deshita, indicating a past negative. So that's past tense, in a nutshell. And past tense I went over during, what was it? That was lesson 8. And Arimasu I went over during lesson 7. Just so that we have that kept for notes. And also in lesson 8, I talked about some particles. Some more particles because, you know, gotta love talking about particles. To is important because it's very similar to the English word and. For example, this sentence here, Eigo to Nihongo o hanashimasu. I speak English and Japanese. This here, this compound word is English, this compound word is Japanese. So, Eigo to Nihongo o hanashimasu. And hanashimasu is speaking. Then it says, can be used to describe two people doing something together. And this, again, Tanaka-san wa Nakamura-san to America ni ikimasu. And you can see here, they use the to after it lists the two people. Wa Nakamura-san to America. So to, the most common use you'll see of it is working similarly to and. Eigo to Nihongo. So that's what to is. Let me just see something real quick. I already did that? Huh. I had that twice. Anyway. Another topic. This is lesson 9. This is the second most recent grammar lesson. We talked about adjectives, and adjectives are one whole mess to work with. They're words that describe other words, as we know. You know, red, green, blue, quick, fast, slow, sleepy, energetic. The main thing to know in Japanese is that there's two kinds of adjectives. Kowa, or e adjectives, and na adjectives. So you can see na adjectives. If we're describing someone with this, we would say genki na sensei. Even though genki itself, that's the adjective, when we combine it with another noun, genki na. Kowa is the word for scary, but when we use it as an adjective, it becomes kowai sensei, a scary teacher. The word omoshiro means interesting or funny, but adding the e turns that into an adjective, and we read it as omoshiroi, omoshiroi eiga. So, what is important to note here, very, very, very important to note, is this root word here. No matter what the word ends with, genki ends with an e sound, but its part, the character itself is genki, ki. Despite the fact that it ends with an I sound, it's part of this kanji here. The na doesn't come until after the kanji. And there's some other words that have this similarity, like the word kirai and kirei. They end with an I sound, with an E sound, but the E is a part of their kanji. So this is a part of just knowing the vocabulary word, knowing the conditions, and just studying your words. So usually you'll see it in context a lot. When you learn the vocabulary words, you'll see how they use it in sentences, and that pretty much tells you whether it's E or na. For now, it's just important to know that these exist, that there's two different classifications. And they have their own kind of conjugations here, so this is going to get a little tricky. So we think about an E adjective, like samui, samu. Samu means cold. So I could say samui desu. It is cold. You can see we're using the E sound there. But if I'm saying that it's not currently cold, I would say something like samu. We know that this character reads as samu. Samu kunai desu. The E gets replaced with kunai. Samu kunai desu. In the past, it's samu katta desu. And in the past negative, it's samu kunakatta desu. There's all these words here, and again, it's important to just study the chart here. I go quite a bit more in depth on this in lesson 9, but this chart here is a pretty quick reference. If I use other E adjectives like atsui, atsui which is hot, atsui desu, atsukunai desu, atsukatta desu, and atsukunakatta desu. The E sound gets dropped in everything aside from the positive, the present positive. Just wanted to get a drink there. And that's how the E adjectives work. Aside from the present positive, we just drop that E sound. Another, like omoshiroi. Omoshiroi desu, it's funny. Omoshiro kunai desu, it's not funny or interesting. Omoshiro katta desu would be it was funny, and omoshiro kunakatta desu was it wasn't interesting. So even though like you're familiar with these words, you hear a lot of these words like atsui, samui, tsuyoi, yowai, all these like E adjectives that end with the E sound, aside from the present positive, that E sound gets dropped when we conjugate them. So this is, I think, a handy reference to remember how those conjugation works. You can just chop off this kanji and replace it with any other E kanji, and it works. However, there is a specific condition where this gets changed a little bit, and that's with the word E. E, which is good. When I say it's good, I desu ka? It's literally pronounced I desu ka? However, if I say the past tense, it would not be read as ikatta, but rather, when you have a double I sound, the first E changes to yo, which gives us this very commonly used anime word, yokatta. Yokatta desu. It was good. Or, in the context that a lot of times it's used, yokatta is like, thank goodness, you know? Because you're happy, you think something that happened in the past was good. It's good that this happened, so that's where yokatta comes from. And the same rules apply to the negative. Yoku nai desu. Yoku nakatta desu. E sound gets replaced with a yo. And any E adjective that has a double E sound follows this rule. Like, kakkoi. Kakkoi desu would then become kakko yokatta desu. Kakko yoku nai desu. Kakko kunakatta desu. It all, as long as it follows this rule, as long as you have that EE sound, kakko E, that E at the end of the word turns into a yo. It's not a common thing that happens, but I feel like it just sounds weird if you don't do it anyway, so you'll probably realize that it kind of sounds messed up. Kakko I katta desu just doesn't have the same ring as kakko yokatta desu. And then, so those are E adjectives. Na adjectives are a little different. So like if I'm talking about someone who is energetic, I would say like genki na shoujo. Yeah, listening reps help a lot. Practicing and just listening to like TV and anime and just any Japanese media that you can get a hand on, even like streamers, even other VTubers that are Japanese. You'll just hear like when they describe things, you can hear just the sounds, like what they're saying. And I think once you have a certain understanding or grasp on like a couple of grammatical parts of Japanese, I think it goes a long way in understanding the context of what's being said. So here, the present positive, genki desu, you're saying that someone is healthy. Genki janai desu, genki deshita, and genki janakatta desu. If you notice, any adjective, VTubers are great practice, if you lose a plot thread in dramatic media, it feels like a waste. But yeah, exactly. When you're watching a streamer, there's not like a plot that you have to follow. Maybe if they're telling a story or an anecdote, and you come into the middle, you might miss something. But in general, just like us here, we're just talking. So if you come into the middle, I guess this isn't a good example though, because if you come into the middle of this, you'll probably be a little lost. So I guess on the VOD, if you're watching from start to end, you'll have a little bit more of an understanding. Anyways, back to what I was saying. Genki desu, genki janai desu, genki deshita, and genki janakatta desu. If you notice, na adjectives have the same formatting as past tense here. Desu, deshita, janai desu, janakatta desu. We have the same thing here. Desu, deshita, janai desu, janakatta desu. Na adjectives conjugate the exact same way that the des family conjugates in past and present. That's, I think, a good thing to know for na adjectives, is that there's no funny conjugation like there is with e adjectives. Moving on. What do I have here? And we can also, just to see this, some sentences in action with these adjectives, we can add degree adverbs to sort of be a little bit more descriptive with what's happening. For example, その学校はちょっと寒かったです. So here I'm using an e adjective, and I'm using the past positive. So その学校はちょっと寒かったです. That school was a little cold. ちょっと is a little bit. Here it says 海はとてもきれいでした. The sea was very pretty. And you can see there's no particles between them. If you're using a degree adverb like that, if you're using a modifier, you don't need a particle in between. ちょっと寒かった、とっても綺麗でした. You just throw it in before the adjective, and it lets you know to what extent it is that adjective. And then we get to what we talked about from our final lesson, our most recent lesson. And I might phone it in here because, again, this was the most recent lesson. And what this lesson is, this is another conjugation lesson. And so far, we've talked about present and past tense. Taberu becoming tabemasu. And in the past tense, it becomes tabemashita. So we have a special form, a special conjugation for verbs that we want to do a certain kind of action with. And these are those actions. We call te form what it is. It is a command form. It's if you're asking someone to do something, if you're asking for permission, telling someone that something's prohibited, that is what this form is for. And it's also used when we have multiple verbs in the same sentence. And the rules here, and I'm going to go over this very briefly because, yeah, forcing others politely, exactly. I talked about that last week too. I don't want to spend too much time going over the rules because the rules are consistent, but there's a lot of different cases here. So the question is it an U verb or a RU verb? And if it is an U verb, what is the final character in the word? So we talked about U and RU verbs probably about an hour ago. That U verbs, the last vowel changes, but the consonant stays the same. While RU verbs, we just slap RU at the end. That's why when we put RU verbs into command form, taberu becomes tabete, miru becomes mite. So if someone says mite, mite, it means that they're asking you to look at something. Mite kudasai. Please look. Please look. Tabete, you know? Your friend hasn't eaten in days because they've been locked in their room watching VTubers. So you would say tabete kudasai. Please eat. Very simple. Taberu is the base word. We drop the ru, replace it with a te for te form. You know? Pretty straightforward, I would say. It just replaces the last syllable. And then where it gets really tricky, and I'm not going to commit too much to this, I'm just going to explain it pretty briefly. And then use a couple of examples, use a image to sort of go through everything else. So, if a verb ends in u, tsu, or ru, so iu, matsu, or toru, that u sound, u, tsu, and ru get replaced with te. So iu becomes ite, matsu becomes matte, toru becomes totte. And these are all commands. Ite means to speak, or asking someone to speak. Matte is asking someone to wait. Totte is asking someone to take. You'll hear a lot of times in anime, the overly energetic character starts running fast, and then their partner or friend is like, chotto matte! You know, please wait. Wait up. Matte kudasai, please wait. Ite is asking someone to say something. And it's that te sound that is the instruction. It's telling you to do that instruction. However, if we have mu, bu, or nu, as in yomu, asobu, or shinu, we replace that last character, mu, bu, or nu, with nde. So, yomu becomes yonde, asobu becomes asonde, and shinu becomes shinde. Shinde kudasai. Itsuno shimasu ga shinde kudasai. Taihan, I'm late for my meet cute. You're what? So, shinde is telling someone to die. Asonde is telling someone to play. Yonde is requesting someone to read. And here we have ku, ends in ite. So, hiku becomes iite. Kaku becomes kaite. Similarly, gu, if ku ends it with ite, gu ends with ide. Oyogu becomes oyoide. Isogu becomes isoide. Meet cute, meeting the romantic partner in a cute way, like crashing into them. Oh, for your meet cute. And then su, if it ends in su, like hanasu or kesu, we end it with keshite. So, hanashite, please speak. Hanashite kudasai, please speak. Or keshite, which is to erase. Keshite, rirai toshite. Like that song from Asian Kung Fu Generation. Keshite, rirai toshite. The song is asking to erase it and to rewrite. Because it's the command form. That's what the shite is telling us. Because sudo, whenever you have a noun, like benkyo sudu, telling someone to study would be benkyo shite. And overall, there's a lot to memorize here. But we have here, this picture here gives us a pretty good idea. We have utsuru de, mubunun de, kuite, kuide, sushite, surushite, kurukite, e form. So utsu and ru, and with te, mubu and nu, when we conjugate them to tell someone to do something, it ends with unde. Ku ends with ite, gu ends with ide. And if you memorize a song, you'll actually, I feel like it helps a lot with understanding how to conjugate into that command form. So we have ao, which is meeting. Telling someone to meet someone would be ao, turning to atte. Matsu, like I said earlier, is matte. Uru becomes utte. Nomu becomes nonde. Tobu becomes tonde. Shinu becomes shinde. Kaku becomes kaite. Oyogu becomes oyoide. And hanasu becomes hanashite. So it's a conversion from the regular form to the te form. And the last few things I have to talk about. So, if I say this, te mo ii desu, what it means, I said that it's command form, but what this really means is that if we're using te form, and then followed up with mo ii desu, this is asking permission. For example, the sentence here, on o yonde mo ii desu ka? Can I read the book? On is book. O, yonde. Yonde is asking to read, or is commanding to read. Mo ii desu ka? And since it's ka, like we said probably about an hour and a half ago, ka is a question. So if we're using the command form with a question, it's asking you, am I allowed to do this? Do I have the permission to do this? And you could respond by saying, hai, yonde mo ii desu. Yonde is a command. Mo ii desu. You're allowed to do this. Yonde mo ii desu. So one way to use the te form is asking for permission. Another one, say you're an authority figure. Koko o asonde iimasen. You can't play here. That de, asonde, is our te form. And we follow up that te form with wa iimasen. This tells us that we're not allowed to do something. So we can't play here. And it's typically reserved for authority figures. And the most common use of te form, I actually didn't save the slide for some reason. I'm going to write it again. The most common use, I'm pretty sure, is Ooh, I like this brush a lot. Sai. And what this means... Te? Since te form is a command form and kudasai is please, essentially what you're saying is, yeah, it looks a lot more like chocolate than my other brush, is requesting something from someone. So for example, we'll use the example I used earlier. If I say yonde kudasai, yonde kudasai. Wait, that's wrong. Kudasai. This is please read. So that's that te kudasai form. Matte kudasai, please wait. And so on. So that's pretty much it. That is pretty much all that we've covered over these past 10 weeks. There's a couple of things that I skipped around. This last lesson was lesson 10, this te form, I should have mentioned. So if there's something from this review that you feel like you missed or you feel like you couldn't comprehend a lot of, that maybe you're watching this VOD in the future and are your notes are updated now, that's good to hear. So if there's something that you feel like I might have glossed over a little bit too quickly, I do mention where each lesson is, and each lesson is titled. And yeah, there's things even from 101 that you forget. It's really common, like, they teach you these basics, but like, some of the basics you don't use, but they're important to have there because, you know, they are like the mechanics of the language. It's important to build on that. So if there's anything that we talked about, you know, I did like go over quickly like the different like verb forms, like oo forms and oo verbs and roo verbs, e form and na form adjectives, that kind of stuff. If there's anything there, you can always refer to my VOD archive on YouTube, and I have everything listed out. I have everything titled so that you know what the main topic is. And there were some topics that, like, I talk more about certain colloquialisms, certain phrases that I didn't want to force into this because, again, we're already at 2 hours here. So I think it's important, at the very least, I think everything that I talked about today is a good starting point. I think it's a lot less daunting to watch, like, maybe skip around a 2-hour VOD than it is to skip around 10 plus hours worth of content. But I feel like this really sort of does a pretty nice job of, at the very least, compiling everything that I think that is important moving onwards. And if there's anything else that you need more clarification for, then you can always just watch the archives, or you could just feel free to DM me any questions, or you could just Google it. Does anybody else have any... So will we be moving into more advanced things? Yes! So the next lesson, I actually intended to teach it this week, but I wanted to have this lesson today because I want to have a sort of checkpoint for people who are interested in learning. I want them to have a sort of video that they could watch and sort of get a hang of all the things that they may have missed, you know? Because it's daunting. Like, if you followed me, like, when I was on my 8th or 9th video, then it's hard to just, you know, lean into what we're learning. You need some sort of, like, jumping off point. So now that I'm here, now that I have this video here, now that I have the stream done, I think it's a lot less intimidating to have under 2 hours worth of content versus, I think, closer to 15 hours of content. I think each of my lessons are about an hour to an hour and a half long. And it's good to hear that your doubts from past classes have been resolved. I was worried that I might have gone a little bit too fast and it would like sort of seem like mush, but if this helps you sort of understand better what we've gone through, then that's good to hear. The next lesson is going to be more on te form. We've talked about connecting, we've talked about requests, I didn't mention connecting two verbs together because with this being so close to the most recent lesson, I think you'd be able to just go back and get that information. But we're then going to talk about other uses of te. And I'm actually really interested for the lesson following that, which is going to be on short form Japanese. We're going to be talking about, not the last lesson, previous lesson. So I think the lesson after that is going to be on short form Japanese and colloquialisms. So it's going to get us away from all this formal speak and let us talk more casually, which now that we've gotten to the basics, now that we've gotten a lot of basic grammar down, being able to use that more shorthand to sound more like a human being when you're talking to other people, I think is going to be a pretty good jumping point. So with that being said, it has been 2 hours already. Uh-oh, it looks like the stream cut out right at the end. I hope you're all still here. I'd like to send you all to a good friend of mine who is having a new outfit reveal and is going to do a Satsudan stream, a free chatting stream. So let's all send you guys over /raid to Golden Kenji. Make sure you give him a warm welcome. As always, thank you for staying and listening, and class is dismissed.